Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly thank you for calling this very important hearing on this issue. My question to the two of you, and I appreciate your attendance here today. As I've listened to the questions from my other colleagues, it is certainly clear from your answers and your testimony that the Department of Homeland Security has not been intimately involved in protecting the security of the most personal and most private information of the American citizens through the Healthcare.gov website, and that responsibility rests, as you kept testifying, solely, at this point, solely with the Department of Health and Human Services. And many times you said that question should be asked of them, not of you. So my question to you then would be, do you play a role in determining acceptable risk when the Department of Homeland Security, not the other departments or the Department of HHS, but the Department of Homeland Security, do you play a role in determining what is acceptable risk when the Department of Homeland Security launches, when you launch, your department launches a new website within the department? And as Mr. Duncan was reading off a list of serious risks that the HHS had identified before the launch of the Healthcare.gov, if the Department of Homeland Security would have identified those kinds of risks, similar risks, before you launched a website for the Department of Homeland Security, not one of the other departments, your department, would you have found that risk acceptable, and would you have advocated the launch of that website?
In the Department of Homeland Security, the principal risk acceptance official is the Chief Information Officer, and that is an organization roughly parallel to mine. We have a strong engagement with the Chief Information Officer through a series of information exchanges. It is not typical, even in the Department of Homeland Security, for that risk official to reach out to us on specific systems or applications as they go forward. We engage with them through the same broad conversations as we go forward. For the information technology systems that we operate, as I pointed out, things like the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program and the intrusion detection programs like Einstein, which I'm grateful to this committee for its support of. We are responsive to the CIO in detailing the compliance actions forward and ensuring compliance with the security standards that are set. And so there's a
So would you have raised any question at all? I mean, I understand you don't want to answer any questions about HHS, but now you can't even answer a question about your own department, although you say typically you talk back and forth. But typically, I mean, typically you can't even raise a red flag?
For the magnitude of the numbers of applications that we're talking about, ma'am, are substantial. For example, in HHS, in their FSMA 12 report, they reported 10,648 individual applications. And so within any specific one, it's difficult to go in great detail. For the applications,
so typically, since I have a limited amount of time, typically you can't even raise those questions, right?
Typically, under the current authority landscape, that is a true statement.
Okay. Well, that is an interesting answer, and I appreciate your candor. You can't raise a question if you had those kinds of problems. Could you then, shifting gears just for a moment, I wanted to pick up on something the Chairman mentioned at the outset. Typically, the Congress has oversight responsibilities, and typically, when we have hearings like this, typically for hundreds of years, typically, we get testimony from the witnesses, typically at a deadline. Now, in this case, for whatever reason, we did not get, whether you were unwilling or unable to give us your testimony. I mean, as a member of Congress trying to typically do my job, I'm trying to read the information the day before, the night before, whatever, so that I can be prepared, typically. But in this case, we couldn't get your testimony before the hearing. Now, I don't know if that is typical for you or your department not to respond on the deadline. Usually we do get it. As the Chairman mentioned, perhaps it's because the White House wouldn't allow you, in this case, to give us the information. And could you expand for me, at least, why that was, you were not able, You were unable or unwilling to give us your testimony to meet the deadline, which is a typical situation.
It certainly is. I'm a believer of being prepared myself, and so it is certainly a goal of all of ours to ensure that we provide information in as rapid a manner as possible to individuals. And in my office, we work very hard to ensure that we are responsive and within the controls and constraints that we operate under. And so I am pleased that you were willing to have us here to speak, even though the testimony did not arrive to you in time. So thank you for that. I'm not familiar with all of the steps between here and it arriving on your door to speak to this specific event. I'm happy to go back and look and get you an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're apparently not going to get any answers out of these witnesses, so I appreciate that. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
I appreciate